Here we are again, folks. It's Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. I'm going to give you an address. If you're interested in a free Bible education, check it out. This is Titus Baptist Seminary by Dennis L. Farr. He's the president. Telephone number 706-416-2121. And if you go to www.titusbaptistseminary.org, that's titusbaptistseminary.org, you will find this school. I graduated from this school with my bachelor's, and I school in many other things. I'm schooling even now, I'm still schooling. I've been schooling now since 1972 I started schooling. I've been schooling since then. I'm schooling now by Thomas Road Church, Lynchburg, Virginia. Some stuff that Jerry Falwell had 20 years ago, as much as even 30 years ago. And I have discs and tapes and things that I study by, and I still do daily studies from these colleges by these men. One of the best men, I can't tell you his name right now because it's not in my mind, but one of the best men I have is through the Old Testament in Jerry Falwell's Lynchburg Church. This man was super duper a great guy. Probably if you looked up that seminary, you could find the reel-to-reel discs, and that's what I'm watching as I study it. Now, you know, he had over 10,000 students during a decade there at Thomas Road in Lynchburg. He used this book right here, the Wilmington's Guide to the Bible. That's the book Jerry Falwell used in his college, and he turned some 10,000 students out a year or so from Lynchburg with using this very same book that I'm using. It's the very same book that Titus Baptist Seminary uses also. Now, this is a pretty much basically a free a deal here. You have to buy your books, and this is one of the first books you will buy, this one. If it's the only book you can buy and you use it, you can learn a lot from it. But if you will take the advice of Brother Dennis Farr that runs it and buy the books that he says that are good books, books that have no rights to them. The man that wrote them wrote off the rights. He said you can copy anything that he says and write it down any way you want, or preach it over the YouTube, or do what you want with it, and nobody's going to come to get you for evading the rights of the book. And that's the way with this book right here. I can quote you verbatim out of this book and pass it on to you, and the man in heaven will get some more rooms on his mansion. We'll get some more things given to him, his reward. Everything that you use out of this book goes to that man's reward in the heaven of heavens forever. And so our work does not stop when we leave this earth. Those things that I'm doing on the YouTube right here, some 1,800 of them will go on forever. They will go on and on and on and on and on, unless they are somehow astronomically destroyed. They will go on. So the introduction of the creation stage that we went through in Genesis, I just went through some of that in a couple of excerpts. I've done some in other excerpts, but I'm going to recap. Well, how do you learn? You learn by recapping. How many times did you go ABC before the teacher brought you up DEF? You go ABC. I'm learning my ABCs. ABC, ABC, ABC. How did you learn your numbers? You went 1, 2, 3. The teacher brought up, what is this? This is 1. What is this? This is 2. What is this? This is 3. And she hold up 3 fingers. 1, 2, 3. And then the next week, she comes in and she says, we're going to grow today another number. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4. 4. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is the one we're going to learn this week. We're going to learn 4. It has 4 points on this 4 that we do this way. Or we can do it this way and it has 4 points on it. And so, no matter which way you do it, it has 4 points. That's a 4. And we learn what a 4 is. Just like we learn the capital A, the small a, and the cursive A. And we learn those. And we learn those in segments. Now you learn the Bible in segments. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and you learn the 66 books, and you can say them. And you're able to say them. You can sing the song of the Bible. You can sing it. You can learn it so that you can quote it, so that you know it. If you're a Christian, you ought to know the book that you have. When you went to get a driver's license, you took a test. The questions on that driver's license was the subject matter of driving. If you did not answer those correctly, you did not get a driver's license. And if you wanted a class 3, which I used to drive a school bus, and I had a class 3 license. I had to learn all of the rules for a school bus driver, and that's the way I got my school bus driver's license. My wife and I both had one. My wife had a nurse's license. How did she get that? She went to school, and she worked hard for 3 years to get a license to be a nurse. And she pushed through, working hard, doubling up, tripling up, advancing on courses, doing things that took more time than she took, because she, instead of wasting time, she used the daily time every day to absorb herself in what she was doing, and excelled in it, and graduated in a shorter period of time than it would have took otherwise. That's the way we're going to learn the Bible. If you want to learn the Bible, you got to get in it. You got to learn it first. You got to learn some things. You can learn 5 books at a time. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's the first 5 books of the Bible. Those are called the books of the law. Those were written by Moses. And you learn all of these things by getting in and studying that. Where were they written? It tells us where they were written. Each one of them tells us why each book was written, tells us what each book is about, and tells us the way of life that God was preparing for his children, the children of Israel. And why did it take so long to get through from the Old Testament to the New Testament? The reason is man is objective. He wants to deject God, and he wants to put himself in there, insert himself in the place of God. Well, that was from the beginning. The devil started that with Eve and Adam, and wanting to put man ahead of God, and knowing what God knew that he didn't want you to know, that you didn't need to know. There's a lot of things you don't need to know. When you're a child, you don't need to know. Many of the things children know today, they don't need to know. They know this up here. They're not even at the place where action can take place yet of what they know. They know more than they should know for their time. And therefore, they've got their stages of life all confused. And life is confused for them, and life is not good for many of them today, because they're totally distorted in what life is really about. So we're going to see the introduction to the creation stage, which was Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 11. There are 3 important men in this stage. There was Adam and Enoch and Noah. Now, if we'll go back to Genesis, and we'll see those 3 men. If you want to, get your book, Who's Who, in the Bible. I have that book. And that tells you the name of these 3 men. It tells you Adam, and you go and you see what Adam, and you see he was the first man, and it tells you about Adam, when he was born, when he was created by God, and when he died. and it tells you about his life. And then you see Enoch, and it tells you about his life. And then you go and you look up Noah, and it tells you about Noah. Now you know something about the first three men that were in the Bible that were used by God. These were godly men. Their names in here because God used them. In between all of these men and under these men were thousands and thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. Millions. When Noah came along, the earth was surrounded all the way around it with people. All the way around it was filled with animals and people. And God had to destroy it. And then we see four important events. Was the creation of this earth and the creation of man. And then we see the fall of man and the great flood. And then we saw the Tower of Babel come up. So these are three of the first events recorded in the Bible for you and I to go back and look at and see why. Why the flood? Why the Tower of Babel? Why these things took place? Why were they there? Why did God create man in the first place? He created man to worship him. Because God is the mighty, all-important ruler, and he had to have subject. And the subject was mankind. And he made it where mankind could give an account to him. This includes everything from the acceleration to the galaxies, from dinosaurs to deadlines, and from Adam to angels. Now we learn here's a new word that just been thrown on us, angels. Well, if you want to really do a good study on angels, you find Dr. Jeremiah's website, and you get on Dr. Jeremiah's website and you order his study on angels. It is one of the most exhaustive, one of the best studies on angels you'll find from anybody. I have many studies on angels, but Dr. Jeremiah, to me, is the top one, is the one that I like the best. And you can find out all about angels. You can do away with a bunch of junk that you've heard over the years by listening to Dr. Jeremiah explain to you about the angels, who they are, why they were put here, what they do, and what they're for. And then the stages is only one which describes God as resting. In Genesis 2 and 3, when God was finished with the earth, it said, and God rested. Well, I do not believe God was tired. I believe he was showing mankind what mankind has to do at certain points in his life. He needs to step back, set back, and rest his loins, and rest his brain, and rest his body, so that he can function again on a new level the next day or whatever. And to rest a good night's sleep and get up the next day with a clear mind and a clear heart and a clear thing, and get up early in the morning and get going. It gives us the first human that he created, whose name was Adam. It gives us the first human that was born of mankind from Adam and Eve. His name was Cain. He was a godly man. He was born to be a godly man. Cain. And then Abel came along. The record of the first man to die was Abel, and the first not to die was Enoch. But the first man to die was Abel. Who killed him? The first man that was born. Why did he kill him? Because he was born with the devil's idea in his body, soul, and spirit. And instead of doing what God said to do, he did the opposite. God said, if you want to worship me, you bring a little lamb, and you sacrifice that lamb on a fire, and you separate it this way and that way, and you do all these things I tell you to do, and I will accept it. So Abel took the little lamb and did what God said. Well, during that period of time, Cain grew a big garden. huge garden. I mean, he had all the fruits of the world, like the Garden of Eden. And he brought wagons load of stuff up there and piled it up where God said to sacrifice. Within a few days, it was stinking, rotten, smelling, bugs and worms crawling in and out. It was no good. And God did not accept it. But he accepted that little lamb that Abel put up there. Well, Cain got mad and wroth, and he said, why would God accept that little sacrifice he did? I worked hard. I worked and worked and worked. This is where you and I see that the first works of a man does not count. Works of a man does not count. Obedience is what counts. Doing it the way God said to do it, that's what counts. If you do the way God said to do it, then you will have a reward for it, and you will have, well done, my good and faithful servant. You do it your way, and I've done it my way, and I've had disaster. Have I had some Cain-like things in my life? I sure have. Where I did it my way, and God had to come down, put his thumb on me and press it real hard and say, hey, I'll have to squash your head, you keep that up. And so I had to be careful, and I still had to be careful. He gave us the first human to be created, which was Adam, and the first one to die, which was Abel. And the record of man, we are introduced to the serpent. We're introduced to a raven and a dove. Serpent, raven, and dove. These are three things God used through the history of this Bible. The serpent being the evil one. The raven being the one that was caught between the evil one and God himself, and he used the raven to feed a man of God during a time of crisis. And the raven brought this man food during a time of crisis. And then he used a dove, and the dove was a resemblance of the Holy Spirit coming and coming to the earth. I love it when I look out my window in the back of the house here and I see the doves setting up on the wire, and I see the doves flying around the house, and I see the doves here that are not normally everywhere around here in the state that I live in the part of the place I live in. But I see those doves God sends by to us. And we see the glory of God in the creation in Genesis 1:1, where he said it was the grace of God. It was the salvation of God for the mankind that he was going to put on this earth, that he put this earth here for mankind. This earth was put here for mankind. God didn't need this earth. He put it here for mankind. This is only one of his earths. We don't know how many earths he has. We don't know. God's been forever. We don't know how many worlds he has. We don't know anything really about God much more than we know that if we'll believe what he says, follow what his book says, that we will have a good and spiritual life. And we can do that. And the glory of God will come on us as it did from the grace of God when he made a way of salvation through his Son, Jesus Christ. And all of Jesus is clearly seen coming through the prophecy of the Old Testament if you study it in a proper way. It gives the first illustration of human religion, the fig leaves, and the first example of divine redemption, the goat skin. Now, that was human religion that covered their bodies with fig leaves so that God couldn't see their flesh was naked. God already knew they were naked. And covering up with fig leaves didn't change a thing as far as God was concerned. But that's what the world is doing today. They're trying to cover their lives with fig leaves because they want to cover their sin rather than to admit it. They want to cover sin rather than admit it. Till you got to admit sin to get rid of it. And in order to get delivered of it, you got to come clean about it and get rid of it. Now, we see that first lamb God had to kill. He killed that goat skin, and he put the skin over them, or the lamb skin, and he put that skin over them. That was the shedding of blood. The first shedding of blood was that animal that God shed the blood of. God chose that lamb, that particular lamb. Now we know that lamb was the first lamb of a flock of lambs from a mother. But how do we know that? Because God made a system, and he told them it had to be the lamb of the first year, the first lamb. Had to be without blemish or spot. Had to be perfect. What was that an example of? What was to come? That was an example of the Son of God coming to this earth without spot or blemish. Never ever sinned. Jesus Christ never sinned. Never sinned. Never sinned. Was born of his own godly seed that was brought down from the original Adam, brought down to the day in Genesis 3:15, brought down to the day that this seed was put into Mary and birthed this baby, Jesus. And this seed was the perfect seed, hid from the devil, brought down through a group of unsuspecting people, some of them called harlots, some of them called many things, but the seed was hid and brought down through this line, and the Levitical line, this line of Levitical people, and some weren't of the Levitical people, but the seed was brought through. And so we find out that in the pages of the Bible, the whole Bible, in the pages, we're drawn to different things. We're drawn to saints, and we're showed those that weren't saints. We go from ships to satellites, from mountains to towers raised in a plain. We see that God's design for this world is going to be exactly what he planned in the end. It was brought in by a spoken word, and it's going to be taken out by fire. The hand of God is going to take this earth in his hand and cast it into the lake of fire to burn forever and ever at the end. The overall view of Genesis is the creation of all things is the beginning. That's the first day. And the second day was where he started making things happen. He made the day first, and he made the light of the day, and we see that he made each day individually, and he ended that day, and the creation of all things in Genesis 3:5 was finished. It was out there. Then this guy, Satan, sticks his head up. He's already here. And he sticks his head up and causes sin to come in. And then God has to make a way of redemption. And that redemption was the shedding of the blood of that first animal, pointing toward the shedding of the blood of his Son. That animal without blemish was a picture of Jesus Christ, came on this earth for 33 years without blemish. He was born of the seed, the Bible says, of Abraham. He was born of the seed of God. He was born of that seed that was put away in Genesis 3:15. And that seed was put away. He was born of that, and he was born without sin, a seed that had no sin in it. And he was born of a pure seed and on this earth, and he never sinned for 33 years that he walked on this earth, and went back to be with his Father, who he left. He had already been with God for eternity. The eternity past. The eternity you and I have no idea, no imagination, no realistic even idea can come into the little bitty peon brain of a man of what eons of past there was, of what God did, of how many worlds he owns, of how many groups of people he made, how many groups of everything he made, and how many different varieties he made. And if you and I had a book as 5 feet thick, you couldn't list all of the things there is and in that book, and go to the beginning to the end of those things. It would fill a world of books. And then we see a corruption of all things was caused by the devil. He's the one that corrupted all things in Genesis 3 and 5. That we see that Satan was subtle. He was very subtle. He snuck in, and he with a lie, and caused Eve to sin, and then caused Adam to sin. And then we see the redemption of God as God redeemed mankind. Then we see the story of Cain and Abel, the first two men, and how the devil got into Cain through jealousy and killed his brother Abel. And then we see the ministry of Enoch, the first godly man, to walk on this earth, so godly that God took him. God took him to be with him. He hasn't died yet. Because he was a human man and came on this earth and left and hadn't died yet, people of the Bible, people who study the Bible, believe that he may be one of the people that's going to be used later on during an action that's going to take place between heaven and earth, where the great tribulation comes on the scene, and there's going to be some things take place. We can't get into that now. That's a whole nother study. We see the condemnation of all things in Genesis 6 through 9. And then we see the conditions of the prior period of time before the flood and why the flood took place. And then we see the salvation of a group of people through the flood, 8 people, 8 souls. And then we see the confusion of all things. God made a confusion on the earth at the Tower of Babel. He confused all things. And we see the arrangement of man and the judgment of God, and the origin of nations comes about then. Now, the origin of nations, God's going to make his own nation, the nation of Israel, and they are going to become the prophets of God. They're going to be in Asia Minor, in Ararat. They're going to have the Caspian Sea. We're going to study those stories about that, how that all took place, all the way from the Garden of Eden to the land of Nod. And all took place over there around the Persian Gulf, Arabia, and the Red Sea, and the Great Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, in the Egyptian and around the Egyptian Nile. Water has always played a permanent part in mankind. Man has always needed water for more than just drinking. He's always needed water to bathe in. He's always needed water to cross, to get to one shore to another. And that water is the reservoir that God has used ever since the creation, when God made lakes and rivers and things, was to water the earth, that God made the vegetation to have water, and he put the water in the earth to go to a tree that you or I could cut down with a chainsaw and look at it and say, how can that water go up that tree to the top of it when it is solid? It's as solid as a rock. But water goes up that tree all the way to the top and feeds that tree. Man drinks water into his body, and that water makes his skin live. And that water makes him live. You cut that water off and the skin dies. You cut that water off and the body dies. You got to have that water. God made this water as a living substance on this earth that mankind could live with it. You take all the water from a man, and I tell you what, you put him in a place where he's completely dying of thirst, he'll begin to realize that he needs God in his life. He'll begin to say, God, I need water. God, I need water. They begged and prayed for water and put smoke signs up and did everything else when they didn't have any water. And God showed them how important water was. And the water of the Word is just as important. We must have the water of this Word in our life if we're going to live Christian lives. If you should ever check on to one of these PH tidbits, remember this. And I'm going to tell you this one more time. You need to be saved if you're not. If you're just hunting education, that's good. But education without spirituality is as dead as a doornail. And that's it. It's dead. So don't just use education. Ask Jesus. Say, Jesus, I am a sinner. Forgive me of my sin. Come into my heart and save my soul. I need you in my life so that I can take the education that I have and use it for you, in you. And that's the way it's got to work. Otherwise, it's dead and you'll never have any long-lasting thing from it. You'll actually die and burn in hell, and all that you had learned, you could have learned spiritually rather than just in your noggin. You could have learned it in your heart, and God could have used it for good rather than for evil. Well, this is Brother P with Tidbit saying goodbye. We'll see you next time. Right. Bye-bye.